This is Mike McMaster from the Wood County Museum with the latest installation of the program series, The Black Swamp Stories, and this is Black Swamp Stories Part 3. Now, the Black Swamp stretched from Lake Erie west to about Fort Wayne, Indiana, and included both the Maumee River and the Portage River watersheds. It was a large area. It was about 1,500 square miles. And the history of the Black Swamp, as I have pointed out in these programs, is not the mud, it is the people. Now, some of those people are Tecumseh, William Henry Harrison, General Anthony Wayne, but some of those people are just common settlers, little boys, little girls, farmers, postmen of Wood County. They all had a story, and I'll tell you some of those stories today. Now, this is the mystery of the Dutchman's deadening. It's an interesting story I found kind of in an obscure source. Now, the story begins. Henry Shaw was a pioneer of Wood County. He came to Wood County from Richland County. And it's important that many of the pioneers who came to Wood County at about this time stopped first in Richland County. They registered their land, they moved on, and Henry Shaw settled in Henry Township in Section 30, which you can see at the bottom there on the 1833 map of Wood County. Now, Henry Shaw, when he got to this land, he had found that when he got to his land that about 30 acres had been cleared before he arrived in Section 30. And the story goes that before Shaw arrived, a mysterious German from the East who disappeared after a short stay had cleared and deadened an area, and ever since that place was known as the Dutchman's deadening. Now you're asking yourself, well, what is a deadening? The definition of deadening was the causing of a loss of vitality. It was used plenty of times in the 1850s and before. It was used in the 1920s, plenty of times before that. Now, here is a painting, and they are deadening trees. We, north of the Ohio River, would call it girdling trees. And the painting here, they are burning falling trees in a girdled clearing. Like I said, we would call it girdling trees. And right there, that is deadening trees. It was very hard to chop whole trees down. This Dutchman from the east had deadened these trees before Shaw arrived, then left. And when Shaw arrived, he had found an area of deadened trees, which made it very easy for him to later on burn the fallen trees. Now, where do deadened trees come into some of our stories? If you remember the lost girl of the Black Swamp, Mary Frankfather, who was lost in the Black Swamp for 11 days, later in her life, she said that she did not freeze to death in October and November because she sat or slept by a fire every night. The workers that had found her were deadening more trees. And if there was an area of deadened trees, the local pioneers would set them on fire and leave. And little Mary Frankfather would go to the fires, massive 10 acres of burning wood. No one would be there, but she could sleep by the warmth of the fire every night. Now, if you look up the word deadened or deadening on Google Maps to this very day, south of the Ohio River primarily. It is a location name. A lot of times in West Virginia today, but it is a location on Google Maps. Now, in 1858, this is what the map of Wood County looked like. There is where Henry Shaw would have settled. Where is the Dutchman's Deadening today? And you are looking at a map today showing the yellow line at the bottom is State Route 18. To the right is where Potter Road now dead ends into the rail yard. Range Line Road is to the left, the red line running north and south, and the Dutchman's Deadening today is in the bulk water station of Wood County Sewer and Water District. It is in a pond. It's in that corner right there. You cannot visit the Dutchman's Deadening today. Our next story is the most iconic barn in Wood County, or as my wife says, Mike makes a good case for the most iconic barn, but it is just his opinion. And this probably should have been put in Odds and Ends 2 and not Black Swamp Stories 3, but I will tell you the story anyway. This is the most iconic barn in Wood County. And you say to yourself, it looks just like every other barn in Wood County. It is not that side of the barn. It is this side of the barn. And it is the high Joe and Gertie barn that is visible from I-75. It was the barn of Joe and Gertie Carpenter. Now, today, that barn is on just off of State Route 582 at the exit right off of Mercer Road. And as a young boy traveling down I-75 with my parents, we didn't do it very often, from Henry County, we could see that barn and we looked at it every single time. Now, how did that get painted? In 1976, Gertie, it was their 40th wedding anniversary, saw a sign painter, and she asked him, can you paint a big smiley face on the barn to surprise my husband, Joe Carpenter, when he gets home? And that painter painted an 18-foot wide smiley face. Now, Mr. Carpenter, Joe Carpenter, did think it was quite amusing, and in 1977, he added the words, "Hi, Joe and Gertie." Now, people would often joke that who came to Wood County in 1976? Jimmy Carter. Of course, he was known for his large smile, and they joked that that smiley face was there to greet Jimmy Carter. Now, during the blizzard of 78, when I-75 people were stranded on it, they needed to escape their cars and freezing to death. And shining like a beacon at the exit of 582 was that barn. And during the blizzard of 78, 13 strangers spent 3 nights and 2 days at the Carpenter's home. And what a better greeting to stranded motorists than a great big smiley face on a barn. Now, that barn, if it ever was a slow news day, made the news quite often. I can remember reading about it in the peach section of the Toledo Blade. It was in the newspapers quite a bit. Now, Joe Carpenter's son Scott, when he had moved and built his own house, continued the tradition and painted a smiley face on the doghouse today. Scott Carpenter's little shop has a nice big smiley face on it as well. Now, both Joe and Gertie have passed away, but if you look at their tombstone at Union Hill Cemetery, that smiley face on the barn, which made that barn and them so iconic, is even on their grave marker. Now, I was given permission to go out and take a picture of the barn as it sits today. And now that the Carpenters have long since passed away, their house is gone. The barn sits in kind of sad condition. Let's not remember the barn as it sits today, but remember how it looked as we drove north and south on I-75. Now, I called or emailed my connections at ODOT in Bowling Green, and I asked them if they could give me an estimate of how many people have driven north and south past that barn from 1976 till today. And I did not get a response. Later on, I was shocked by the response. There are statisticians in Columbus, Ohio, and they can estimate how many people, not cars, but people, have driven north and south past that barn since it's been painted till today. And the number is 700 million people have driven north and south on I-75 past the exit where Joe and Gertie's barn sits. That is how many people have seen that barn. And that is, in my opinion, why it is the most iconic barn in Wood County, because those people, just like me as a little kid, would all point to that barn. Our last story today is John Chapman's gift. It's his gift to the pioneers of Wood County. And that name might seem familiar to you, John Chapman, Johnny Chapman, also known as Johnny Appleseed. He was a real person. He was born in Massachusetts in 1774. He was not just a hobo spreading seeds. In Massachusetts, he was an apprenticed orchardist. He knew how to plant trees. He knew what he was doing. Now, John Chapman came, just like Henry Shaw, to Richland County, where he set up orchards. John Chapman did not die a pauper. He had owned 1,200 acres in 3 states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. And outside of Mansfield, he knew that the pioneers moving into Western Ohio would need apple trees, and he set up orchards there. Now, as the story goes, the first 1835 orchards in Henry Township were planted from stock coming from Jonathan Chapman in Mansfield. Now, the writer says stock, not seed. John Chapman, Johnny Appleseed did not plant these orchards. They were the people who settled there, George Carroll, Charles Grant, and the brothers Schellenberger. They had bought saplings, what they call apple whips. John Chapman's workers would tend these orchards outside of Mansfield, Ohio, and sell whips, bundles of trees. And George Carroll and the other settlers in Henry Township would buy these whips. They would replant the small apple trees, and they were in section 34 and 33 of Henry Township. Now, can you visit these today? No, you cannot. There is nothing left of them. The 3 locations of these orchards were just off of Mitchell Road and Belmore and State Route 18. There is not a tree left from the stock that these pioneers brought with them, purchased from John Chapman's workers. Now, these apples, John Chapman's gift to the pioneers of Wood County was not food, as I thought as a little kid. John Chapman was planting a specific kind of apple called a spitter, because if you bit into it, you would spit it out because you could not eat it. John Chapman knew what he was doing. He would plant the seeds and get these spitter apples for this. There's William Henry Harrison. Hard cider. These were hard cider apples. In the 1830s, in the Great Black Swamp, of course, the water was very dangerous. One of the greatest dangers in the Black Swamp was cholera, drinking bad water. And the alcohol content of the hard cider that these pioneers were planting was not that high, but it was much safer than drinking the cholera water in the Great Black Swamp. Now, as wells got much safer in the 1870s and 1880s, these apple orchards became unnecessary. And these apple orchards planted from the stock of Johnny Appleseed were cut down, and that orchard was transformed into fields for corn, fields for wheat. But at one time, the hard cider was a very important gift to the pioneers of Wood County in order to keep them healthy. Now, these short subjects are good, solid Wood County history, and this is the end of Black Swamp Stories Part 3.